It's been a rainy April week in the Pacific Northwest, and we've been inside the greenhouse working hard. There's so much to share about the adventure in orchids this week. We're glad you could join us. My name is Joe Greenhour. Welcome to Emerald City Orchids. Some fun things have bloomed around the nursery this week, including some Paphiopedilum, and we will share more about what's blooming in just a moment after we talk about this week's project.
All right, for the project this week, we're working on Phalaenopsis. Phalaenopsis is the gateway orchid. It's what most people start with. If you've never grown an orchid before, this is the one I usually recommend. It's pretty easy. It's a low-light plant. It needs a bright light that's not direct sun. So that's basically any room in your house with a window. You can grow it. And they're tropical, so they like it between 60 and 80, so your inside temperatures are good. And you only need to water it about once a week. And to water it, I would take it to the sink, run it under the sink, and let it drain really well. Some people like to put ice cubes on them. I don't recommend that. Ice cubes are not tropical. These are tropical plants. And, if your kid's thirsty, do you give your kid a glass of water, or do you make them suck on an ice cube? It's not nice to the plant. They come in a lot of different colors. You can get a really great collection going. And the breeders have done a wonderful job of making a lot of different things to choose from. This here is a great example. These two flowers are essentially the same. It's a yellow flower with a red pigment. And on your left is a hybrid known as Baldwin's kaleidoscope. It was bred to have that veining pattern where the red pigment is concentrated into the veins, and it's got a very stark contrast against the yellow. Whereas the one on the right is called Surf Song. It's a more recent hybrid. And it was made the opposite way, to diffuse it. So it looks almost orange, but it's a red pigment overlaid onto a yellow flower. The breeders have done such a wonderful job. There's new ones coming out every year. Like this is a newer Harlequin that's happened recently. It's debuted recently. And all of these species do come from naturally occurring species. So we have a few of them around the nursery. For example, this is Phalaenopsis mannii. It's probably one of the smaller Phalaenopsis. On the other end of the spectrum is Phalaenopsis gigantea, which is, you can tell where it got its name. It's huge. These leaves are a few feet long each, and that's the spike hanging down. It's not in bloom now, but that spike never dies, so it'll come back later. You have to repot Phalaenopsis every once in a while, and it's important because the medium breaks down. And when you repot it, you want to repot it so that the bottom leaves are at the level of the pot. As is my custom, I usually put a little medium in first and then put the plant in on top of that. And then mash it down kind of tight. Now, some people like Phalaenopsis in moss, and some people prefer it in bark. We had a friend visiting the nursery who needed help with these plants, so we're just going ahead and doing it right now. We're taking them out of moss and putting them in bark because this friend has been having problems with saturation on the medium. When it's in bark, you've got to water it once a week. That's kind of the rule. And it's going to dry out in between waterings, which is good for the plant. But when it's in moss, sometimes you can let it go for a long time and not water it once a week. So if you're the type of person that forgets to water your plants and you're really, you need that extra sort of safety cushion, pot it in moss instead of bark. It's a personal preference. You need to know what the plant needs and then what you need as a person. But we're going to put this in bark for our friend, tuck it in there really tight, kind of clean it off right at the level of the pot, and it should be ready to go. We were talking about how they come in a lot of different colors, and you can see with just, a few different things, you get a lot of variety. They don't often smell. This is actually a variety here that has a lovely fragrance. A lot of these ones that are made out of certain breeds of certain species of hybrids, like Bellina, you'll see some fragrance. People ask, what do I do when it's time to rebloom? How do I know it's ready to rebloom? Well, the roots come out from anywhere around the plant, but if you look at the leaves, there's a line that goes down the middle of the leaf. And there's a space there with two leaves above the line. That's where the flower comes out. So it'll come out from where that line meets the middle of the plant. And if you have a space that's got two leaves above it, it'll bloom. So here you see the spike is coming out, and the spot's got two leaves above it, right? And here's another plant that's coming out, and it's got two leaves above it. So if you have one that hasn't bloomed in a long time, just go home and count the leaves. If you can see that there's a space and it's got two leaves above it, you know that plant is ready to reflower. Now, it happens all the time. People take these things home and it never reblooms. It grows bigger and bigger, and they say, what's going on? How come this thing never flowered? Well, you need to let it get cold. So find that spot and then let it get cold. You also, when the thing is done blooming, you have some choices. There's these little cat claw-looking things along the edge of the stem, and then there's a pockmark where the flower used to be, and at the tip there's a little green bud. Now you leave it alone, that little green bud can actually produce new blooms and keep blooming. Or what we do at the nursery is we just cut the stem all the way off. Or what you can do, which is what we do at home, find where that first flower was, that pockmark, and then cut it around there. What you're trying to do is leave as many of these little cat claw looking things, which are the secondary nodes, on there as possible, because those can produce branches. There's one starting to come out, little bitty branch, and there's where we cut it. And then you see another branch right where we cut it coming out, and voila, there's the flower. One of our little surf songs. So anyway, there's some basic tips for Phalaenopsis. Hopefully those help. And, we'll come back to those later, but that's what we've been working on this week, is taking care of these.
So many wonderful things are blooming around the nursery this week, like our Oncidium hybrids. This one is Sherry Baby, famous for smelling like chocolate. And blooming adjacent to it are the Colmenaras, such as Tiger Crow. This particular hybrid is very easy to grow. It has a wide temperature range, and it needs water about twice a week. Oncidium choculatum has produced flowers. It's orange, and it blooms at the same time every year in spring. These Oncidium hybrids are wonderful. They grow faster, and the flowers don't live as long as Phalaenopsis, but you can still depend on them for about a month. We have more Lycastes starting to throw flowers. This albiform is particularly nice and has a wonderful fragrance. And right next to it is blooming a larger Lycaste with a beautiful fragrance to it and this lovely pink hue. This is a type of flower that one can spend all day just staring into. Last year, we planted up these Dendrobium anosmum as seedlings, and they're doing very well a year later. They probably won't bloom until next year. But this year, we have some blooming from the year before that we planted. This Dendrobium is known as honohono in Hawaii. They come in pinks and purples and whites, but they all seem to have a lovely fragrance and a very, very beautiful appearance. Also blooming around the nursery are all kinds of fun, tiny plants. Like this Seraptetalum taiwanense. Has a beautiful orange to it. You can see quite clearly, even though the flower is smaller than the tip of a finger. And blooming near this in the nursery is Scaphocephalum marinoi. This plant has a wonderful bullhorn to it, and a little bit of a spur on the bottom. Has a lovely, bright, vibrant striping to it, which makes it easy to see the color dynamics, even though the flower is tiny. And as we continue through these small treasures, we have Acorcus roseola. It has a lovely grassy foliage and a striking white flower. It's easy to grow, and when it blooms, it's very easy to enjoy. Another flower in the tiny and white department is Pleurothallis viduata. It has a light lavender brush stroke of color and a couple of very dark purple markings on its petals. It is a reliable bloomer throughout the spring. It needs plenty of water. And this dendrobium mounted to a roofing shingle. Who would have thought that such a little plant could produce so many flowers? Dracula carderi is blooming, and the Draculas are hard to spot because they bloom from the bottom. At the conclusion of last week's video, we showed you Cattleya maxima. It had one flower open, but now it has 6. And just 2 logs down is its neighbor, Laelia purpurata, blooming for the first time this spring. It is indeed lovely. We hope you have enjoyed the adventure in orchids this week, and that you will join us again next time.